Jason had been stationed on the distant planet for almost 6 months. It wasn't the peaceful kind of place where soldiers would rest between missions. No, this was a battlefield. The war between human forces and an alien race known as the Varnoth was ongoing, and Jason was caught in the middle of it. The battlefields on this planet were filled with dangers, hostile creatures, harsh environments, and of course, enemy soldiers. Jason had been sent on a reconnaissance mission that went wrong. He was supposed to gather information, not end up in a fight for his life. As Jason crouched behind a pile of debris, trying to catch his breath, the sounds of blaster fire and explosions echoed through the air. His heart raced, not just from the danger, but from the realization that his mission had failed. His team was scattered, and he had no way of contacting them. He was alone. The enemy soldiers were closing in. Jason could hear their footsteps getting louder. He peeked out from his hiding spot, spotting 2 of them moving toward him. His pulse quickened. If he didn't act fast, he was done for. Just as he was about to make a move, something incredible happened. A loud crash echoed from behind him. Before Jason could even turn around, the enemy soldiers were falling to the ground, their weapons knocked from their hands. He saw her then, the one who had saved him. The female alien stood tall and strong, her uniform dark and gleaming under the harsh light of the battlefield. Her eyes glowed with a fierce intensity, and her movements were swift and precise. She didn't hesitate, moving with the skill of a seasoned fighter, taking out the enemies one by one. Jason couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this a dream? In a matter of moments, the enemy was no more. The silence that followed was almost eerie. Jason stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't sure if he was thankful or confused. Who was this alien? And why had she saved him? The alien captain turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak at first, but Jason could see the confidence in her eyes. She was in control of this situation. "I am Captain Silaris," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You're lucky I was in the area. Stay close." Jason barely had time to process what was happening before she turned and began walking toward a nearby transport ship. Without thinking, Jason followed her. It was clear now. He wasn't getting out of this situation on his own. This alien captain had just saved his life, but what did she want in return? As they walked, Jason couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. He had no idea that this encounter would change his life forever. The bond between them had already begun, whether Jason knew it or not. Jason couldn't stop looking at Captain Silaris as they walked toward the transport ship. His mind was racing. Who was she? Why had she saved him? Was she some kind of enemy or ally? Her actions were quick and deadly, yet she hadn't hurt him. Instead, she had just stepped in and destroyed the enemy forces like it was nothing. Jason had heard rumors about the Varnoth, alien warriors with extraordinary strength and skill, but seeing one in person, especially one saving his life, was something he never expected. He had always thought the Varnoth were the enemy, a dangerous race determined to take over human colonies. Yet here was Captain Silaris, a Varnoth, and she had saved him. Was it a trap, or was there something else going on? As they approached the ship, the doors slid open automatically. Captain Silaris stepped inside without a word, and Jason followed her hesitantly. The inside of the ship was sleek, high-tech, and nothing like the standard human ships he was used to. Everything about this vessel screamed authority and power. It was clear that Captain Silaris was someone important. But what kind of captain was she? Was she just another soldier in a war he didn't fully understand? The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, and the ship hummed to life. Captain Silaris didn't sit down. Instead, she walked to the control panel and began adjusting the ship's settings. Jason stood still, watching her, trying to make sense of what had happened. Finally, after a few moments of silence, she spoke. "You must have questions," she said, her voice calm and strong, but there was a hint of something Jason couldn't quite place. "You can ask them, but I'm not giving you all the answers." Not yet. Jason felt a mix of frustration and curiosity bubbling up inside him. He had no idea why she had saved him, and now she was acting as though it was just another day for her. But he couldn't just stay silent. He had to ask. Why? Jason finally blurted out. Why did you save me? We're enemies, aren't we? Captain Silaris glanced at him, her glowing eyes studying him for a moment. Not everything is as simple as it seems, human, she replied. You might be an enemy soldier to my people, but you are also a human. And that means something to me. Something different. Jason was taken aback by her answer. What do you mean by that? She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned back to the controls, her fingers moving swiftly across the panel. Jason stood there, unsure if he had crossed a line by asking. After a few more moments, Captain Silaris spoke again. There's a tradition in my world, she said quietly. When someone saves another's life, they become connected. It's an old custom, but it means that the person who owes their life must honor that bond. Jason frowned, trying to understand. Honor the bond. What does that mean? Captain Silaris looked at him again, her gaze intense. It means that, whether you like it or not, you are now bound to me. Jason's heart skipped a beat. Bound to her? What did that even mean? Before he could ask any more questions, the ship's engines roared to life. They were leaving the planet, and Jason had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing. His life would never be the same. Jason sat quietly in the seat across from Captain Silaris, trying to process everything she had told him. The ship hummed as it sped through space, leaving the battlefield behind. They were now alone, in the quiet of the ship, but Jason's mind was far from calm. He kept thinking about her words. You are bound to me. He had no idea what that meant. Did it mean he had to obey her orders? Was he a prisoner now? Or was this something different, something more complicated? Whatever it was, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a line into a world he didn't understand. Captain Silaris didn't seem to mind the silence. She was busy at the controls, her eyes fixed on the data screen in front of her. She moved with the precision of someone who had spent years in command. Jason couldn't help but watch her. There was something about her that commanded respect. She wasn't just any soldier, she was a leader. And that made Jason both nervous and fascinated. As the hours passed, the ship moved farther from the planet, and Jason began to gather his thoughts. The war between humans and the Varnoth was known to be brutal, but Captain Silaris had just saved his life without hesitation. Why? What was her true motive? It was hard to imagine that a high-ranking alien officer like her would care about a human soldier. Unable to sit still anymore, Jason stood and walked slowly toward the observation window. The vastness of space stretched out before him, endless and beautiful. He felt small, insignificant, but at the same time, the vastness reminded him of something else. Possibility. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something that could change everything. Captain, Jason said, turning toward her, you said I'm bound to you. But what does that mean for me? What do you want from me? Captain Silaris didn't immediately respond. She took her time, as if weighing her words carefully. When she did speak, her voice was calm and steady. You have no idea how much I hate this tradition, she said, her eyes flashing with something Jason couldn't quite read. But it is what it is. In my culture, saving someone's life isn't just an act of kindness. It's a bond that must be respected. I don't expect you to understand it fully, but I need you to trust me. Jason raised an eyebrow. Trust you? After what's happened, you expect me to trust you? She didn't flinch. I saved your life. I did not ask for this bond to happen, but now it's here. We both have to live with it. Jason let out a breath, still unsure of what to make of it all. And what happens now? Do I just follow you around forever? Captain Silaris sighed, clearly frustrated. No, Jason, you don't follow me around like some slave, but you must understand that I am responsible for you now. And in return, you are responsible for me. It's a balance. Jason's mind was racing. This wasn't just about military orders or survival anymore. There was something deeper at play, something that tied him to Captain Silurus in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. He knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed, and there was no turning back now. I don't know if I can trust you yet, Jason said quietly, but I don't think I have much of a choice. Captain Silurus gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. That's all I'm asking for, a chance. As the stars passed by outside the ship's windows, Jason knew that whatever happened next, he couldn't go back. He was bound to this alien captain, and the future ahead of them both was uncertain. But one thing was clear: they would have to rely on each other. And that thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. As the days passed, the ship traveled deeper into the unknown regions of space. Jason couldn't stop thinking about what Captain Silurus had said. The bond, the promise, the idea that he was somehow connected to her in a way he couldn't understand. He had never imagined anything like this would happen to him. Jason had always been trained for combat, for survival, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The war with the Farnath had been about power, control, and victory. Now he was facing something far more personal. He was tied to an alien, a powerful alien captain, by some ancient tradition he barely understood. And that connection seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. Captain Silurus was a mystery to him. Strong, distant, yet somehow familiar. She had saved him. But why? Was it out of duty, or was it something more? It was hard to tell. Every time Jason tried to ask her more about the bond, she would avoid the question, focusing instead on their journey and the mission ahead. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's common area, Jason couldn't hold back any longer. He needed answers. His mind was filled with questions, and he had to know why he was in this situation. "Captain," Jason said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "I need to understand. You said I'm bound to you. What does that really mean for me? For us?" Silurus didn't look at him immediately. Instead, she stared out the window, her expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched on, and Jason could feel the weight of it. Finally, after what felt like forever, she turned to him. "It means," she began slowly, "that I am responsible for you, and you are responsible for me. It is a bond that can never be broken. No matter what happens, we are connected. If I were to die, you would die too. And if you were to die, I would die. That is the price of the bond." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, you mean if one of us dies, the other does too? That's insane." Silurus nodded solemnly. "It's the way of my people. Life and death are not as simple as they are for humans. The bond is meant to ensure that we are never alone, that we always protect each other. If one falls, the other follows. It is a promise, a sacred duty." Jason's mind was reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The thought that his life was now linked to this alien in such a way was both terrifying and strangely comforting. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. "But what if I don't want this?" Jason asked, the words coming out before he could stop them. Silurus met his gaze with a piercing look. "It's not a choice, Jason. It's a responsibility, a promise made by saving a life. You cannot run from it." Jason leaned back in his seat, trying to process it all. The idea of being tied to her forever was overwhelming. He had always been a man of action, used to facing challenges head-on. But this was different. There was no escaping it, no way out. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The hum of the ship and the distant stars outside the window were the only sounds. Jason felt the weight of the bond, the promise that now tied his life to Captain Silurus. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The days continued to pass as Jason and Captain Silurus traveled through the vastness of space. The bond between them was still fresh, still strange. Jason couldn't help but feel a growing sense of confusion and unease. His mind constantly drifted back to the conversation they'd had about the bond. The idea that his life was now tied to hers, that they were connected in ways he couldn't yet understand, left him feeling restless. Captain Scillaris, on the other hand, seemed to be adapting to the situation with an air of quiet control. She wasn't a woman to show weakness, not in front of her crew and certainly not in front of Jason. She had saved his life, yes, but beyond that, she still remained distant, her thoughts hidden behind the walls of her stoic exterior. It was almost as if she were trying to keep him at arm's length. Jason could sense the tension between them, a quiet, invisible barrier neither of them seemed willing to cross. It wasn't that she was cruel or cold, far from it, but there was something about her that made him feel like an outsider in his own life. She was strong, focused, and seemed so much more capable than he was. Yet at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that she, too, was struggling with the bond they shared. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's mess hall, the silence between them felt more suffocating than usual. Jason glanced at her, wondering what was going through her mind. She was eating slowly, her gaze fixed on her food, but there was an intensity in the way she held herself. Jason opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. The words felt stuck in his throat. What could he say? How could he make sense of everything that was happening between them? "Captain," he finally said, his voice soft but steady, "why do you keep pushing me away?" Scillaris paused mid-bite, her eyes flickering up to meet his. There was no anger or frustration in her gaze, just an unreadable calm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Scillaris set her utensils down and sighed. "I'm not pushing you away, Jason," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm trying to protect you. I don't know how to deal with this bond. It's not something I asked for, but it's here now. And I'm not sure what it means for us. For you." Jason frowned. "It's not just me, is it? You're affected by it too. You can't pretend like this doesn't bother you." Scillaris didn't answer right away. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "Of course it bothers me, but I'm used to duty, to responsibility. My people expect me to lead, to protect them. I don't know how to navigate this connection with you. It's unfamiliar. I've never had to rely on anyone like this before." Jason nodded slowly, his mind turning over her words. It made sense. Scillaris was a leader, a captain. She was used to making decisions, taking charge. But now, with this bond between them, it wasn't just about orders or commands. They were connected, in ways that went beyond their control. He could see the struggle in her, even if she tried to hide it. "It's hard for both of us," Jason said quietly, "but we're in this together now, whether we want it or not." Scillaris met his gaze for the first time since they'd started talking. Her eyes were softer now, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in them. "I know," she replied, "but it's going to take time, Jason. Time for both of us to understand what this really means." For the first time in days, Jason felt like there was a crack in the wall between them. Maybe it wasn't all bad. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. The days blended together as Jason and Captain Scillaris continued their journey through space. The bond between them was still a constant presence, something they could neither ignore nor escape. Jason was beginning to understand the gravity of their situation. He could feel the pull of it, like an invisible thread tying his life to hers, no matter what happened. But that feeling wasn't always comforting. In fact, it often left him anxious, unsure of where he stood. Captain Scillaris had kept her distance, focusing on the mission ahead. She was always in control, always the leader, but Jason could see the occasional flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It was clear that she was struggling with the bond, just as much as he was. They didn't talk about it often, but there were moments, silent moments, when they both understood that something had changed between them. It wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about survival. trust, and something deeper than either of them had anticipated. One morning, the ship's alarm blared loudly, cutting through the stillness of the cabin. Jason shot out of bed, his heart racing. The ship shook as the warning lights flashed red. He didn't wait for instructions. Years of training kicked in, and he hurried to the control room where Captain Silaris was already preparing for whatever was coming. "What's going on?" Jason asked, trying to steady his breath as he took his place beside her. "We've detected enemy ships," Silaris replied, her voice calm but focused. "They've tracked us down. We're outnumbered." Jason's stomach dropped. The last thing they needed was a fight, especially after everything they'd been through. But there was no choice now. The ship was surrounded, and they had to act fast. Silaris looked at him, her expression hardening. "I need you to trust me, Jason. We're going to fight. But you have to stay close. You're more important to me now than you realize." Jason nodded, his nerves tightening. The bond was still new to him, but in moments like this, he couldn't help but feel its weight. He had to protect her. He had to fight beside her. "Stay close," Silaris repeated. "If we fail here, we both die." The ship's weapon systems were activated, and the battle began. Jason took his position at the weapons station, his heart pounding as he fired at the enemy ships. The tension in the air was thick as laser blasts and explosions rocked the ship. Jason's hands trembled, but he kept his focus, firing whenever the enemy ships came into range. Beside him, Silaris was a whirlwind of calculated movements, giving orders and directing the ship's defenses with precision. She was a born leader, a true captain, and Jason couldn't help but admire her strength. But as the battle raged on, something unexpected happened. Jason's senses sharpened. He could feel a strange surge of energy coursing through him, almost as if the bond between him and Silaris was amplifying his abilities. His reflexes were faster, his aim sharper. He was able to hit targets he normally would have missed. Silaris noticed the change. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing with surprise. "The bond. It's strengthening you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jason didn't have time to respond. He focused on the task at hand, keeping his aim steady as the enemy ships began to retreat. Their weapons were no match for the combined strength of the crew and the unspoken bond between him and Silaris. As the battle came to a close and the ship's systems returned to normal, Jason couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. He had survived, but more importantly, he had fought for her, and somehow, in that moment, he understood what Silaris had meant by the bond. It wasn't just about being connected physically. It was about loyalty, about standing by each other, no matter the cost. Silaris turned to him, her face serious but with a hint of respect. "You did well, Jason," she said quietly. "You're more than just a soldier now. You're part of something much bigger." Jason swallowed hard, a new sense of understanding settling in his chest. The bond had tested him, but in that moment, it had also brought him closer to Silaris. He wasn't just bound to her by duty anymore. It was something more, something that would tie them together forever. The tension in the air was palpable as Jason stood next to Captain Silaris on the bridge of the ship, staring at the vast expanse of space before them. The battle had been won, but the price had been high. They had barely escaped the enemy's ambush. And now, the ship was badly damaged. The crew had sustained injuries, and the ship's systems were struggling to stay online. Jason felt a weight in his chest, a feeling that had been growing stronger ever since the battle. The bond between him and Captain Silaris had deepened, but so had the risks. He could sense her exhaustion, the strain of leadership weighing heavily on her. But there was something else, something darker, that Jason couldn't ignore. Captain Silaris had been injured during the battle. A deep gash on her arm, though not life-threatening, had caused her to lose some blood. She hadn't shown it at first, pushing through the pain like she always did. But now, as she stood at the control panel, Jason could see the faint tremor in her hands. She was struggling to keep it together. "Captain," Jason said, his voice soft but firm, "you need medical attention." Silaris didn't look at him, her eyes still focused on the console in front of her. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice clipped. "There's no time. We have to keep moving." Jason took a step closer, his heart pounding. He could feel the bond pulling at him, making him more aware of her pain than he had ever been before. It was as if her suffering was his own. The connection between them was no longer just mental or emotional. It was physical. He could feel her fatigue, her fear, her determination. "No," Jason said firmly. "You're not fine. You're hurt. You need to rest." Solaris finally turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't have the luxury of resting, Jason. We have a mission to complete. Lives are at stake." "I get that," Jason replied, his voice steady. "But you're not going to accomplish anything if you collapse from blood loss." She stared at him for a long moment, as if considering his words. Then, with a sigh, she relented. "Fine," she said, her voice softer now. "But you stay with me." Jason nodded, but his mind was still racing. He knew that the bond between them wasn't just about saving her life. It was about something deeper, something neither of them had fully understood yet. As he helped her to the medical bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this connection than just duty. It was becoming personal. Once inside the medical bay, Jason guided Solaris to the bed and helped her sit down. He watched as she winced in pain while he applied the medical bandage to her arm. There was a deep, quiet moment between them, one that neither of them spoke into existence but both felt. As he finished, Solaris looked up at him, her gaze intense. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "You could have left me to do my job, just like before. You could have kept your distance." Jason's throat tightened. The bond between them was stronger than he had realized. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, someone who followed orders and did his job. But now, with Solaris, it wasn't about orders. It was about something else, something that made him want to protect her, even if it meant putting himself in danger. "You're not just my captain anymore," Jason said softly. "You're more than that." Solaris's expression softened, though her eyes still held a hint of uncertainty. "And what does that mean, Jason?" He paused, unsure of how to put it into words. The bond between them was still so new, so unfamiliar, but the connection was undeniable. "It means I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the ship. Then, Solaris gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're bound to me now, Jason, whether you like it or not." Jason smiled back, a sense of resolve settling over him. He was bound to her, yes, but that wasn't the worst thing that could happen. It was the beginning of something he couldn't yet fully understand, but he was ready to face whatever came next, together. The days following the battle were quiet, but the tension between Jason and Captain Solaris was still palpable. The bond they shared had become a heavy presence, one that neither of them could escape. Jason could feel it with every passing moment, an invisible connection that grew stronger with each interaction. And yet, the more he felt it, the more he found himself struggling with it. He was starting to realize that the bond wasn't just a simple connection. It was more than that. It was a responsibility, a weight that they both carried. Jason had always been independent, someone who relied on his own strength and instincts to survive. But now, he wasn't just responsible for himself. He was responsible for Solaris, and she, in turn, was responsible for him. But the weight of that responsibility was starting to feel like a burden. The closer he got to Solaris, the more he felt his own freedom slipping away. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was someone who had to protect her. He had to be there for her, no matter what. And that scared him. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's common area, Jason found himself lost in thought, staring at the stars outside the window. He had never felt so conflicted. The bond had changed everything. He could feel Solaris's presence beside him. And yet, there was still a distance between them. She was the captain. He was just a soldier. She was powerful and distant, and he was just trying to keep up. Jason, Silaris's voice broke through his thoughts. You've been quiet lately. He turned to her, surprised by the concern in her tone. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. But then, the words came out before he could stop them. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Captain, Jason admitted, his voice low and hesitant. The bond. It's too much. I don't know how to be what you need me to be. Silaris's eyes widened, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't speak, and Jason wondered if he had said too much. But then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. You don't have to be anything you're not, Jason, she said quietly. You're here because you're capable. You're here because I trust you. But this bond, it's something we both have to navigate together. It's not easy. I know that, but we have to figure it out, or we both risk losing everything. Jason looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he saw her vulnerability. She had always been strong, always in control, but now there was a crack in her armor. She was just as unsure of the bond as he was, and that made him realize something. He wasn't alone in this. Maybe I've been fighting it too much, Jason said, his voice more steady now. Maybe I need to accept that I'm not in control anymore. Silaris gave him a small, knowing smile. We're never fully in control, Jason, but together we can face whatever comes. For the first time in a long while, Jason felt a sense of peace. The bond was still there, still strong, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust it, and trust her. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Jason and Silaris sat together, no longer strangers bound by duty, but partners bound by something stronger. The bond wasn't something they could escape, it was something they had to embrace. And in that moment, Jason knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days had become a routine. Jason and Captain Silaris had settled into an uneasy partnership, the bond between them still strong and constant. The ship sailed through the endless expanse of space, each moment marked by the quiet hum of the engines and the occasional exchange of words between them. The tension that had once been so thick between them had started to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. They weren't just captain and soldier anymore, they were something more. Partners, bound together by the promise of survival. But Jason still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this bond than he had yet realized. He had accepted it, yes, but he hadn't fully understood what it meant for his life. He hadn't understood what it meant for Silaris, either. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's observation room, Jason looked at her closely. Silaris had always been the strong, stoic leader, but tonight she seemed different. She was gazing out the window, her face soft and thoughtful, her shoulders slightly hunched as if the weight of the universe was on her. Captain, Jason said, breaking the silence. What happens after all this? After the war, I mean. After everything we've been through. Silaris turned to him, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer right away, and Jason could see the gears turning in her mind. She wasn't used to discussing things like this, emotions, the future. But there was a quiet vulnerability in her eyes that Jason hadn't seen before. I don't know, Silaris replied quietly. There's still so much to be done. The war isn't over, Jason. My people are counting on me. Jason nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had seen her fight with all her strength, her commitment to her people unwavering. But even someone like her, someone so strong, so capable, couldn't carry that burden forever. What about you? Jason asked. What do you want when this is all over? Silaris's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jason saw a hint of something personal in her gaze. I've never really thought about it, she said slowly. I've been focused on survival, on leading my people through this war. But I've realized something important. Jason raised an eyebrow. What's that? That I don't have to do this alone. Silarus said quietly. For the first time, I realized that I don't have to carry all the weight by myself. I've always believed that I had to be strong for everyone, that I couldn't show weakness. But you've shown me that maybe it's okay to lean on someone. Maybe it's okay to trust someone other than myself. Jason felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He had never expected to hear words like that from her. He had always seen her as someone who didn't need anyone else, someone who could carry the world on her shoulders. But now, she was admitting something different. She was admitting that she wasn't invincible. She was admitting that she, too, needed someone. "I'm not going anywhere, Captain," Jason said, his voice steady. "You don't have to do this alone." Silarus met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for something. For reassurance, maybe. And in that moment, Jason realized that they had both changed. The bond between them wasn't just about survival or duty. It was about trust, about support. They had both learned to lean on each other, to accept the connection that tied them together. For the first time, Jason truly understood what Silarus meant when she said they were bound. It wasn't just an obligation. It was a promise that they would stand by each other, no matter what. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Jason and Silarus sat side by side, their bond stronger than ever. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. The stars outside the ship's window were distant pinpricks of light in the endless black of space. Yet, as Jason sat next to Captain Silarus, watching the vast expanse pass by, he didn't feel so far from anything anymore. The bond between them had transformed into something different, something deeper. It was no longer just a force that tied them together. It was a shared connection, one that gave them strength, not just in times of war, but in times of peace too. The war was not yet over, but they had made it through the hardest part. With every battle they fought side by side. Jason had come to realize that the bond between him and Silarus wasn't just a matter of survival. It was about understanding, about shared purpose, and about mutual trust. The uncertainty that once surrounded them was slowly being replaced with something more grounded, something that made their future feel less uncertain. Jason turned to look at Silarus, who was staring out the window, her face calm but thoughtful. Her usual stoic expression was softened by the quiet of the moment, and Jason could see the toll the war had taken on her. He could feel the weight of her leadership in every decision she made, every move she took. But there was something different now. There was something he couldn't quite put his finger on, a shift in the air between them. Silarus turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Jason," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "We've come a long way together, and I think we've both learned something important." Jason raised an eyebrow, curiosity lighting up his expression. "What have we learned?" Silarus smiled slightly, a rare expression of warmth. "That we're stronger together, that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders alone, and that no matter what happens, we've got each other's backs." Jason felt a rush of emotion, a mix of relief and pride swelling within him. They had come so far, through so much. And now, the future no longer seemed as daunting. There was still work to be done, battles to fight. But for the first time, Jason wasn't afraid. With Silarus by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Jason said quietly. "But now, I wouldn't have it any other way." Silarus's gaze softened, and she gave him a small, approving nod. "Neither would I." The ship continued its journey, the stars outside twinkling like beacons of hope. Jason and Silarus sat together in silence, each lost in their thoughts, but connected in a way that was undeniable. There was no need for words. They had already said everything that needed to be said. The future was uncertain, yes, but Jason had come to understand that he didn't have to face it alone. Silarus was with him, and he was with her. Together, they would face whatever the universe threw their way. And as the ship sailed on, Jason knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, they would never be separated. The bond they shared, the promise they had made to each other, would last forever.